on, guys? Ted from Nerd Immersion here, and I'm back with my What's New series, because, as we know, Friday, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes released, so it's time for What's New in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. Normally when I do this, I'm like, oh, look, it's here, and the physical book is in my hand, and due to craziness at work, with storms and things, I was not able to go to pick up my copy from my friendly local game store. I will be doing that. I was supposed to do that today. But that being said, I did pre-order it on D&D Beyond, so I do have access to it so I can review it and you guys can see it. And it'll actually be easier probably as you'll be able to see it on screen. So, as a sort of a disclaimer at the start here, what I'm going to be going over is a very high-level overview of what is new in this book. But I'm going to do separate sub-videos like I did with Xanathar's Guide to Everything, where I do a deep dive into those things. Especially because a lot of this stuff has been released before in one form or another, or has just been updated from, say, Unearthed Arcana, and then I will do a comparison video to talk about what the differences are. So, it is split into 6 chapters. The Blood War is Chapter 1, Elves is Chapter 2, Dwarves and Durgers Chapter 3, Gith and Their Endless War is Chapter 4, Halflings and Gnomes is Chapter 5, and then the Bestiary, which is really what everybody's here about. The Bestiary is Chapter 6, and that is all of the new monsters that are included. So that's very cool. I guess I'll give you very early initial impressions is I'm gonna say underwhelmed and slightly disappointed in this book, and I will go into this further as we go through it, but I feel like I thought we were gonna get a lot more. But the first chapter is about the Blood War, and if you're unfamiliar with what that is, that's a big ever-present ongoing war between the demons of the Abyss and the devils of the Nine Hells. And this is very cool. There's a ton of backstory about that, and they dive into the whole process behind it. I thought we were gonna get a lot of stuff like that, especially with this whole Mordenkainen traveling the world and being obsessed with balance and then checking all these different conflicts. I thought we were going to get stuff on, say, the Far Realm, dealing with all of aberrations and cool stuff with that. We were going to get, like, little pockets of lore dealing with all of these major D&D kind of conflicts and things throughout the multiverse. And really it just focuses on the Blood War and then gives us information that, in my opinion, should have probably been in the player's handbook or in a separate book entirely, but we'll go into that. So, first of all, D&D Beyond, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. Here you can see all of what I basically just described to you, and then down here it splits, breaks it all out. The disclaimer in the front of the book, which is usually the funny little thing at the front. Here, we asked Mordenkainen to write a humorous disclaimer for this book, and we got this response. The day I start writing frivolous disclaimers for game manuals, particularly one riddled with stolen text from my notes, is the day I retire from wizardry and abandon all self-respect. So let's check out Chapter 1, The Blood War. I'm going to be honest with you, there's not a ton of new stuff here. The Blood War is nothing new, so if you're unfamiliar with the lore of it, this is very good for it, and it does, I will say, lend itself very nicely to options for campaigns, and it's just cool stuff to have in a text if you don't have it already. In previous editions, we had books like, say, the Fiend Folio, all the way back to early, I believe, first edition, and I know definitely second. We had books called the Fiend Folio. I'm looking at one right in front of me for third edition, and those books were just a book dedicated to fiends, and obviously gave you new fiends as well, but there was a lot of lore there. And I personally believe that rather than putting a chunk of this in this book, just give us the Fiend Folio back, and then that handles that, and this could be whatever you want it to be. Part of the reason I think they're doing things this way is they have this mentality, this philosophy, that they don't want to just do books that are books, if that makes sense. We all know that Wizards of the Coast is trying to reduce book bloat in 5th edition by not releasing books all the time. I know there's probably, I want to say close to 200 3rd edition books. I could be wrong on that number. And probably pretty close to that with 4th edition books, because I know, even though I wasn't playing 4th edition, I'd be at Barnes & Noble or something like that, and every time I was there seemed to be at least 2 to 3 new 4th edition books every time I went to visit. I know there was like 4 players handbooks, and then there was books about each individual race, and it was very concise on, like, it was like the human book, the Dragonborn book. In 3rd edition, they did the races in kind of groups, like Races of the Wild was like elves, and like, I can't even remember what else was in it, but Races of Stone was like gnomes and Goliaths and dwarves, and the dragon, Races of Destiny, and so on. And I'm getting way off track here, but my point is, I feel like some of this, the philosophy is they want these books to be books that you would find in lore in the universe of Dungeons and Dragons. That's why we had the first 3 books, which are the core books, which I don't feel like they'd be stupid to try to change the names of in future editions of the Player's Handbook, the Monster Manual, and the Dungeon Master's Guide. We got those. Then the next book was the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, sort of the red-headed stepchild of 5th edition in my opinion, because I feel like a lot of people don't really read it, because the 90% of that book is Sword Coast lore, and if you're not playing in the Sword Coast, it's useless to you. But it was the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, as in, if you were a character in Dungeons & Dragons and you were adventuring in the Sword Coast, you could pick up this guide. Just like we got Volo's Guide to Monsters, was a book written by Volo Thamgedard to teach us about monsters. And there's a little subscript texts, like this thing from Volo or Elminster chimes in here. And then we got Xanathar's Guide to Everything, a book written by Xanathar, or the Xanathar, the kind of ever-powerful beholder crime lord who lives under Waterdeep. And that was kind of, again, written from his perspective. And then we got all that. Now we've got Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, a book by another popular Dungeons & Dragons name. And this is sort of covering stuff that he would cover. And I feel like the Blood War does that very well. I feel like the subsequent chapters, not so much. So what do we get here? You can see the headlines over here, and it pretty much outlines it. So I'm going to scroll, so just watch your eyes as I scroll through this. And these things that you're seeing right here, this is basically, we had the little Xanathar ones with the little eye and Xanathar's Guide to Everything. This is Mordenkainen's comments throughout the book. They look like this. So it basically talks about how there's this ever-present war. It talks about how a little bit about the River Styx here, the battlefield, blah, 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 blah. Things that are new, as we get into here, is the Lords of the Nine. Now, knowing who they are is not new. I believe this is actually listed in the Monster Manual. But we have stat blocks for the Lords, the Lord of the Nine, all the Lords of the Nine Hells. We had previously received the Demon Lords, the Abyssal Demon Lords, in Out of the Abyss. So if you picked up Out of the Abyss, and you had all the Demon Lords in that book, like Inagu and Dewey Blex and all of those, they're in that book. They are reprinted in this book, and as you know, that's like 30 pages of Out of the Abyss, and that is about 30 pages regurgitated into Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. So you lose it, like, that's a chunk of stuff that could have been reprinted in another book or just left in Out of the Abyss, and now it's in here taking space out of this book. But you can see the various layers of the Nine Hells, the layer names, and who rules them. And then they go into, like, here's Asmodeus, the Lord of the Nine Hells, ruler of the Ninth Hell or the Ring of Nessus, and then it gives you background on Asmodeus. And then we have Zariel of the and it goes through, and here is all of the information for basically a high-level snapshot of who they are and what their deal is. So we're going to keep scrolling, because we have all that. So let's keep going. Oh, this section is about cults. Now, if you remember in the Fiendish Options Unearthed Arcana, the one that gave us new Tiefling Sub-Races, they had a section about demonic cults. That was demonic cults dealing with demon-related cults, but this is a section about diabolic cults and how they're rendered. So this is devil-based cults. And, you know, different structures of how they go and their rules and paths to power. And this is probably pretty useful about how devils gain power in their ranking system. That's not necessarily new, but good information. And then here we have our diabolic cults. And what this does is it says if you are a cultist, this is a way for you as a dungeon master to expand upon that. If you are a cultist of, say, Asmodeus, you get your cultists, they're, you know, if they're truly devout in their cultism, if you will, they can gain additional benefits. So, demands at the start of each of this creature's turn, this creature can choose one ally they can see within 30 feet of it. The chosen ally loses 10 hit points, and this creature regains that number of hit points. If the creature is incapacitated, it makes no choice. instead chooses the closest ally. So that's the Cult of Asmodeus. And we can scroll down and see Dispater and Fierna and so on. Sometimes it lists the typical cultist, which this is again referring to the NPC rank in either Volo's Guide or the Monster Manual. So if this says Acolyte, it doesn't mean like that's what they're called. If you look up the Acolyte NPC stat block in the Monster Manual, it's saying that's a typical cultist for them. Signature spells for them to use. I like this. It adds a little bit of flavor. Talks a little bit about how they work. Then this is the Infernal Loyalty, kind of their basic. Any base cultist gets this. And then cult leaders get this, Loyalty Beyond Death. And you can see it changes for each lord as we go. But again, Loyalty Beyond Death. As a reaction, when an ally this creature can see is reduced to 0 HP, that ally is instead reduced to 1 and gains temporary hit points. So you'll see, again, as we scroll through here, each demon lord has signature spells, has their kind of base cultist ability, and then the cult leader ability. That is legitimately new stuff. And then explains why they'd want cults in the first place. A little bit about Infernal Cambions. If you're unfamiliar with what a Cambion is, they are in the Monster Manual, but it's a joining of some sort of fiend and some sort of humanoid, and that makes a Cambion. Typically, you'd say a human, so a devil mates with a human, and then that makes a Cambion, a half-devil, or a half-fiend, if you think about it that way. The ones in the Monster Manual are Infernal. They do give us stuff on Abyssal Cambions later on, and they give you some options. And here, we have Tiefling Sub-Races. Most of these, I'm not really going to go into, or really at all, because I did a video when the Fiendish options Unearthed Arcana released, and I'll do a separate video comparing them. The only difference is we did get some additional Tiefling Sub-Races. So you can see that most of these, I will say everything that, from what I can recall, that's in that Fiendish options Unearthed Arcana is completely untouched. The only one that jumps out at me that I believe that was completely different was Mephistopheles, because I don't believe it was in there, and this has some pretty awesome spells. Again, I'll do a whole video on this comparing the two, so be on the lookout for that. How to customize devils. They kind of have this for both demons and devils. Honorifics, traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws to explain that, and then we jump into the Abyss. So now we're dealing with demon lords. Talks about how they're all chaos and how their thralls work and blah blah blah. Here's all the different. Again, we get a little bit about cultists for each of these, and we're going to get there eventually. So this is, let's see, demonic boons that can be granted to creatures that have benefits from the various demon lords, and it talks about here, you know, Demogorgon, Baphomet, and abilities they gain. And then here's demonic cambions, like we had talked about before. How to differ them from infernal cambions. Customization tables for demons, similar to what we saw before. And then again, fiendish cults. I think this is fiendish cults in general. The demonic boons was more for the cults as well. It's weird that they didn't call it demonic cults if they called it the diabolic cults up here. So then some information about how to create fiendish cults, and that's it. So that's it for that whole first chapter. Not a whole lot. I did talk a while about it, but I did more commentation than anything else. Chapter 2 is Elves. Elves are D&D 101, D&D bread and butter, vanilla Dungeons and Dragons. Did we need an entire chapter devoted to lore about elves? My opinion, no, we didn't. Granted, there are differences and nuances to what people see in a Dungeons and Dragons elf versus like a Tolkienian elf or something like that, but there's no shocker, and we all are aware that they're somewhat based on one another. Dungeons and Dragons heavily influenced by the Lord of the Rings series and things like that. We do get some interesting stuff. It goes into the difference between drow and surface elves and why that exists. It talks a little bit about things that you may or may not know, about how trance works for elves, and that trance, at some point the elves undergo something, I believe it's called the Revelation. We'll probably see it as we scroll through, but basically while they're trancing, they can tap into experiences of their past life. Cool. Necessary? I'm gonna say probably not. Again, this is roleplay stuff, and you could roleplay that regardless of whether it's in the book. Like, it doesn't give you, like, if your DM doesn't say that that's gonna happen, or you don't want to roleplay it that way, then that's useless information to you. It's cool lore, sure, But I feel like a lot of people would want that to be a little bit further expanded and give us more options. We get books so few and far between. We want more. I feel like maybe I'm in the minority here, so let me know, guys. But I feel like we want more crunchy stuff. We want more monsters. We want more options to play as our characters, variants to our various classes and things like that. Not just a butt ton of lore, or give us a lore book so that we know that that's the lore book and this is the crunch book. Then again, it's a lot of the history of the elves. And this one, I will say, gets a little bit more because they do give us a couple of different elf options for sub-races. Again, I'll do a separate video on that, but I'll touch on it here. And that explains the reason for some of this. Again, these kind of things, like where it's like, oh, elf adventurers, elves and magic, and things like that. A lot of this kind of information was contained in, like, again, I use 3.5 as an example because it's something that I'm familiar with. But there was a lot more information in the 3.5 player's handbook about races and about classes that explained them a little bit further and gave you a little more insight into a lot of the stuff about them. And I feel like they're making separate books for this, whereas a lot of this you could have found one way or another. And then again, later on, they made the Races series of books that dove into the specifics of those races, but you knew what you were getting. Like, we got Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, we knew we were going to have a bunch of monsters, and then there's a lot of, like, I don't know, fluff lore for the various races that already exist in Dungeons & Dragons. So, this I will say is cool. The Elven Pantheon, I don't know if this has been printed in 5th edition. I know we got a handful in the back of the player's handbook, but this is the full Elven Pantheon. So that is new as far as I'm concerned. They added this the Blessed of Corlon, which is the rarest of blessed elves, can change their sex whenever they finish a long rest. A miracle celebrated by elves of all sorts except drow. And basically then they describe that if this ever happens in a drow, they probably immediately beat feet to the surface, because drow are a very matriarchal society. Male drows are more or less treated like garbage. So if you were to wake up one day and then be a male when you were a female before, you'd be treated like crap. So it's not something you probably want to deal with. And it actually talks about how it's, again, not something... they don't, when they bow to Loth's influence and chose to fix their physical forms, elves lost the ability to transform in this way. Yet occasionally, elves are born who are so androgynous that they proclaim to be among the blessed of Corlon. This is cool. This is a new thing. It's not like a hard mechanic, I guess. And the DM decides whether an elf can manifest this miracle. So again, if your DM doesn't have this book, or doesn't care to pay attention to this one blurb of text in this entire section of lore about elves, this doesn't really affect you too much, and that's kind of a bummer. So that's something that is new, so worth touching on there. Again, we're talking more about the elven deities, skipping along, blah, blah, blah. So now we're talking about the Feywild, because we're talking about Eladrin, because Eladrin are Fey-touched elves. Again, that I believe is the 5th edition choice. They used to be an entirely separate race of sort of a Fey-touched race, and now they're kind of making them a subset of elves, just like they did with Shatterkai, which I'm, again, not a huge fan of how they did that either, but it is what it is. Here's the list of drow deities, other than Lolth, which was the only one I knew. And how drow enter the void rather than entering a trance. Skipping ahead. Lolth stuff, drow, the Raven Queen, and Shatterkai. Again, I don't know if Shatterkai in the past had a tie to the Raven Queen at all. I don't believe they did originally. I know they definitely weren't elves initially, but now they are. Little obsession with Vecna. And then here we get into the elf sub-races. Again, I will do a separate video on this discussing it, but we have the Eladrin and how they break out into the kind of 4 sub-races, but Eladrin is associated with one of the 4 seasons, has color recognition of that. So, okay, I guess that means that you do get to choose, which is very cool, because the options, this affects some of the abilities you use, is which one you pick. So that's cool, I do enjoy that. And then they give you personality traits and flaws tied to your season. So again, I will dive into this further in a Unearthed Arcana comparison video, as some of these things have changed. So I want to, spend the time to go in and show you what the difference is, especially if you're playing a version from Unearthed Arcana and you want to play the new version, or your DM says, you can play Unearthed Arcana, but if it gets published, you have to switch to that. This way it'll show you how you're affected. So we have that. We have Sea Elves were printed. They talk about their ongoing war with the Sahuagin, and then Shatterkai, and then a couple of tables here, Elven Trinkets, Story Hooks for Elves, and Drow has specialties. So the Avariel, the Winged Elves, they didn't get printed, and I don't know if it was the Grugark, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, but like the sort of mountain strength-based elves, they also didn't get printed. Why? I'm just curious. Like, what was the decision to just go for 3? Was it space in the book and you couldn't fit them? I mean, the Sea Elf blurb was this big. Like, why couldn't we get those other 2 elves? Were they really... I mean, I get the Winged Elves is sort of... Wizards of the Coast does seem hesitant to allow winged PC characters, because, again, that's concentrationless flight at level 1, which can really rock the balance a little bit. And if your DM doesn't think... If your DM thinks linearly, rather, that kind of screws a lot of that up. So, Chapter 3... Dwarves and Dwergar, however you want to pronounce it. I'm going to keep saying Durgar because it rolls off the tongue easier for me. It's probably Dwergar, but that's how it is. So, what is this? Again, it's the same thing we just talked about for Elves. You get the full Dwarven Pantheon, which is very cool. And then a section on Durgar and their gods. And then Durgar stats. But, as I had... Now... Remember my comment earlier about the Sword Coast Adventures Guide sort of being the redheaded stepchild of 5th edition? Again, personal opinion, but still. I had a conversation at PAX East with a guy who routinely runs adventures for the Adventurers League. And a large, and it's for the Roll Initiative, a large Adventurers League outfit. And we were talking about Mordenkaine's Tome of Foes and how we're excited to see what comes in it. This is back in March. And he was like, I'm so pumped I can finally play as a Durgar. Their stats are going to be in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. I'm so pumped. And I'm like, well, you know that they're already in the Sword Coast Adventures Guide. And he was like, really? And I was like, yeah, they were printed in that book. And he's like, oh, that's probably because it's in the Sword Coast Adventures Guide, and I didn't really pay attention to that book. And I feel like I get his opinion because most of it's lore, which is fine. But, like, the classes, there wasn't that many that were good, and the good ones were reprinted in Xanathar's guide. The backgrounds, again, Adventurer League players, it's pretty fluid, and it's easy to customize and make your own. That's a rule in the player's handbook, how to make your own background instead. And then they had, like, 3 races. Ghostwise Halfling, the Durgar Dwarves, and Svirfneblin Gnomes. And then, like, some Tiefling variants and Half-Elf variants, but that's it. So, basically, I'm going to skip through this because I told you what you get. The Dwarven Pantheon will show up here in just about a second. Here it is, Morden, Dumathoin, and so on. We scroll down, talk about Dwarves and Ale, and again, here's stuff on Durgar. We get the Durgar Pantheon, which is not very many. It's only 2 gods. We scroll all the way down to the bottom. We get some tables for Dwarves, which is mostly about Dwarven clans and groupings of Dwarves. Oh, here's what your clan does, clan vocations, and then how, story hooks and quirks for dwarves. I do like this kind of stuff. I'd love to see this for every race, which is another reason why I don't know why we had to get only certain races here, but like the quirks, like water from the sky, it always surprises you, or for you, relaxation is putting in a day at the forge. These kind of weird quirky things, I'd love these for every class. I love them for every subclass, and I love them for every race and subrace. This is just cool, fun stuff that, again, you don't have to use, but I feel like more often than not, when people are presented with something like this, it's fun to look at it, or, in my opinion, fun to roll on the table, see what comes up, and then use those. Like, they introduced these for, like, the Shadow Sorcerer, for instance, had quirks. And a lot of people I know loved those. So, why not have this kind of stuff for more options out there? Again, digress here. Durgar tables, the same kind of stuff. And then, I even skipped over Durgar characters. Here's the stat block. It's exactly the same as in the Sword Coast Adventures Guide. I'm not even going to go into it. Nothing has changed. You still have sunlight sensitivity, which is probably the biggest detractor from playing one of these. But there you go. Dark Vision, Undercommon, advantage against illusions, Charm, Paralyze, and a couple of spells. Alright, so that was Dwarves. Now, Gith, this is new, because Gith, again, Gith Yankee and Gith Zerai exist in the Monster Manual. They are very generic in the Monster Manual, but they do give you a little bit of lore in the Monster Manual as well, but this dives into this a little further. And if you want to deal with the whole Astral Plane and the Gith War, this is a very cool way to do so. This is good stuff, because it's new. Just like I said, the Blood War is new. It's lore. Now, some of that stuff was, copy-pasted, but, or not copy-pasted. I'm thinking more about the stat blocks. Let me go back. The Blood War stuff isn't necessarily new to 5th edition. Neither is the Gith stuff. But it's new. It is new to 5th edition, but the lore itself is not new. It's been around for a while, and if you do a little digging and a little research, you'll be able to find it. But this is new for a lot of folks. And again, I highly approve of the Blood War chapter, and I approve of this chapter, because we're introducing Gith, a whole new species and race, to the game as playable characters. So having lore about them is important, because we don't really have it anywhere else other than them as monsters to fight in the Monster Manual. Elves and Dwarves, I feel like even if people don't know the D&D stuff, they can still posit enough information about them from their general knowledge of everything to understand that. Again, I don't think they needed a whole chapter in these books. Similar to how like Volo's Guide to Monsters had a player characters chapter and just gave you a little bit of, basically gave you the text and the stat blocks, I think that would have been fine for, dwarves, elves, and we'll see with gnomes in a little bit. And that would have been fine. Even that with Gith, but they have a long, interesting history, so they decided to print it. Talk about how Gith have dragon mounts, and they do go into there is a new magic item here, so I will talk about that right now. This is the Silver Sword. So that's not to be confused with a silver sword, a silvered sword, where you go to a blacksmith in game, pay 100 gold, and get your sword to be coated in silver for the purposes of overcoming damage resistance. This is a special weapon that allows you to do some pretty cool stuff. So you can see magic item, Greater Silver Sword. It's a great sword, legendary, requires attunement by a creature that has a psionic ability. This magic grants a +3 bonus to attack and damage rolls. While you hold the sword, you have advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. You are immune to being charmed and have resistance to psychic damage. In addition, if you score a critical hit with it against a creature's astral body, you can cut the silvery cord that tethers the target to the material plane instead of dealing damage. So the whole thought behind this, and if we read this block here, is when you astral project in Dungeons and Dragons, whether that be through an astral projection spell, through some sort of ability, or an offensive attack, if that's even a possibility, you go unconscious, and your astral body, if you've seen Doctor Strange or any kind of thing where there's astral projection, you come out of your body, and you look like you in a silvery-ish fashion, and your body is tethered to the material plane, and you have a thin silver thread that connects your astral body to your mortal body. And if that is ever severed, you basically die. Your astral form exists and can do whatever it wants to do, I believe, but your body, I guess, here we go, I'm going to reread it, it's right in front of me. A strike against such an enemy, the weapon is particularly effective on the astral plane against any travelers who are connected their physical body by a silver cord. A strike against such an enemy has a chance of severing the silver cord, causing instant death. There you go. Answer to that question. So you just die. So this is a really cool thematic to the lore of the Gith and that whole story. Granted, how often are you going to come across a silver string connecting an astral projected body to a body on the prime material plane? That's really all dependent on your campaign and the DM, but the fact that it does other things than that. It is a +3 weapon, which is pretty badass, and it gives you some pretty awesome stuff. Advantage on saving throws, immunity to charm, and resistance to psychic damage. I super love this. I think this is really cool. So, new magic item. I am a fan. Let's keep moving. Here's the stuff about dragon steeds I was talking about. The Gith alphabet. We talk a little bit about the astral ships for sailing around Limbo. Gith cities. And then now we're talking about Gith Zerai. So we can scroll down. Their interaction with Mind Flayers and Gith Yankee. And then we have the Gith characters. These are definitely 100% different than they were when they were released in Unearthed Arcana. Enough so that, again, they require their own video to discuss that in further depth. So we'll scroll down. Then we have stats here for, rolling them up height and weight-wise. We have names and things like that. This Shasolko, I'm going to call it, is basically a small group of Gith that are trying to reunite Gith Yankee and Gith Zerai. The only reason I know about that is I believe that's what you have to be a part of if you want to play a Gith in the Adventures League. Names, traits, ideals, bonds, flaws, and then stuff about their raiding parties, and so on. So that's it. New stuff for Gith. Again, I will be doing separate videos going into that. Then probably what I'm going to call a pity chapter, honestly. Halflings and Gnomes. It's probably the shortest of the chapters. It has some cool stuff like halfling superstitions. These are pretty cool. A large silvery squirrel could be Yandala in disguise. Be on your best behavior and offer to treat when you see her. Talks about life as a halfling. Apparently they like to skip fish. Seems kind of cruel, honestly. There's just Tales of the Fish Skipper right there. And then again, here are the halfling deities. Here, Yandala, Brandobaris, and so on. Stuff about the deities. The halfling adventurer. And then they give you personality traits, ideals, bonds, flaws, and they jump into gnomes. Now again, remember, I told you that the Ghostwise halfling, which is one of the coolest halflings in my opinion, was printed in the Sword Coast Adventures Guide, and it didn't get a reprint. That's a halfling that has telepathy. Just always has telepathy. And it's a halfling that gets +1 wisdom and telepathy. So it's a +2 dex, +1 wisdom. Pretty solid character. Has telepathy, and they're just like, nah, forget it. That can stay in the Sword Coast Adventures Guide. Then we go into gnomes. We're going to get the same kind of stuff here. Toy makers, alchemists, blah, blah, blah. Artificers, tinker gnomes and their philosophy. Forest gnomes and their philosophies. For Neblin and theirs. And then here are the various deities, as we, Garl Glittergold probably being the main one that most people know, at least in my opinion. Enemies that they hate kobolds and things. And then basically, the further we scroll down, we get into deep gnomes. Here's the stats for the deep gnome characters. This is exactly the same as it is printed in the Sword Coast Adventures Guide. And the optional feat as well is for Neblin Magic. Which is funny that prior to Xanathar's guide, this was, I think, the only racial affinity feat, and this was, again, printed in the Sword Coast Adventures Guide, and then they hadn't done anything again with that till Xanathar's. And then we have gnome tables. Again, we don't even get, gnome raiding parties. They had not there would be raiding parties, but, clan stuff. So I feel like this chapter was sort of just thrown in to fill space. And then, the part that I'm sure everybody really came here for, the Bestiary. So this is a bunch of brand new monsters. There's definitely some cool ones. A lot more aberrations than I would have thought, especially given the fact that there's no aberration-specific chapter. Again, we had the Blood War, so you would expect a lot of fiends, devils, and demons, and there's a fair few. There's a bunch of aberrations, though, so I had assumed we were going to get a chapter on the Far Realm, or something to deal with aberrations in general, and we just don't. Again, there's a lot to go through here, and these stat blocks are a lot of high-level creatures, 18 CR to higher. I believe the highest in this book may be CR 30, but definitely I know there's a couple that are CR 26. Zariel, for instance, Lord of the first level of Hell. She is a CR 26. So that means, as you would expect, a ton of information just to go through their stat blocks and their various abilities. First up, I believe, is an Alep, and you can see that it has a handful of stuff just by itself. Undead, CR 5. And then, you got the Astral Marauder, or Astral Dreadnought, rather. look at the size of the stat block, right? Like, so this is going to take me a while to read through it. So I am going to do separate videos on each. Basically, I'm going to break it out like this, like you see on screen here. Or maybe don't because it's behind me. Basically, A to C, D to F, G to L, M to R, and S to Y. It may be a little bit longer than that because monsters D to F includes demons and devils, and that's a ton of space. But there is a fair few monsters of high. You know, here's another aberration, the Balhanoth. The Burbalang, this is a level 2. Bone Claws are one of my favorite monsters from previous editions, so I'm very excited to see them make a comeback. But I do feel like this looks like 4th edition art rather than 5th edition, but that's regardless. There are a lot of classics as well. Again, as I just mentioned, the Bone Claw makes its appearance, as does the Corpse Cadaver, the Choker, or Corpse Collector, Cadaver Collector, damn it. The Choker, the Grey Render is here as well. So there's a lot of classic, what I consider to be more classic monsters that existed that have disappeared from 5th edition, have made their comeback in this book. Although Chokers were in either one of the DM's Guild or like a supplement for Tomb of Annihilation somewhere. So they did exist elsewhere. Some Clockwork stuff. Again, some of these are familiar to me as well. Here's a Corpse Flower. The Deathlock is a really cool creature. I highly recommend that you read the lore on it, which I will do as well as I go through it. And then we get into demons, and then this is a massive chapter. We can skip down to G. We have the GIF here, your hippopotamus people that use, you know, explosives and fragmentation grades. We have a whole section on Gith as well. A bunch of different Gith. Again, makes sense. Again, like I said, I'm not going to really go through this. We have this. Okay. I'm going to talk about one thing. This makes me mad. So, again, Eladrin NPCs as well. So we have Elder Elementals. Okay, sounds cool. We have an issue in the book where, like, you can conjure elementals. And, you know, druids can turn into elementals, although that's limited. So this doesn't really help you too much in that department, but it's cool to see elementals that are better than just, like, water elemental or fire elemental. We have, right here, is the Leviathan. First of all, this is badass art. I love this. This is this big water snake underground monster that looks pretty nasty to mess with. Then you see Phoenix, and I lost my shit. I love Phoenixes. I'm a big nerd for Phoenix, and I loved Phoenixes in previous editions of Dungeons & Dragons. Again, 3rd being my one of choice. So, in 3rd edition, I think a Phoenix was a Celestial, first of all, which is fine that it's not. I can understand the connection with the elements, so I'm okay with that. But it also had what I'm assuming a lot of you expect, especially those who know Harry Potter, is that it had healing capabilities. It also had a butt ton of magic. And in here, it's basically a mindless fire bird that is dumb. Ready to look at the stat block? 2 intelligence, folks. A Phoenix. Pretty cool art, not gonna lie. 2 intelligence. 2. Look at the rest of its stats. 19, 26, 25, 2, 21, 18. It has a cool rebirth mechanic, as to be expected. It has a fiery body, so if you hit it, it hurts. It has legendary resistance. It's a high-level creature. That makes sense. It lights up. It's made of fire. Makes sense. It has the flyby ability, which is pretty badass because flyby means you can attack and things and move. Your movement doesn't provoke attacks of opportunity, and you have 120-foot fly speed. So he's like an owl on steroids. Deal double damage to objects, and you can make 2 attacks a turn. A beak attack and a talon attack. And that's it. You are a physical attacking monster. You can't even shoot a ray of fire, breathe fire, throw a fireball, make a fiery gust attack like a fiery Pidgey. None of that. You can attack with your beak and attack with your claws. Now maybe, and I will admit, that this is a very small piece to nitpick on, but this is important to me, and I feel like it really undersells a Phoenix in general, especially, again, with the lore around, you know, and I think we're all kidding ourselves if we don't think that things that happen in pop culture don't influence the creation of stuff in Dungeons & Dragons, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure the more popular certain things get, right? Like, and maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like the Raven Queen's popularity brought on by Critical Role helped influence the fact that the Raven Queen has a large connection to things in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. I could be wrong, but that's my opinion. So you would think where things like a phoenix, which is a lot of people may have learned for the first time from Harry Potter, where it's a creature that has cool options, has a soothing song, has healing tears, would at least have something like the Lay on Hands ability of a paladin of a level of 10, right? Because it's got 10d20 hit dice. So it has 50 points of Lay on Hands. I'm okay with that. That makes me feel better. Now, I may do that myself if I homebrew a creature and add some stuff to a phoenix to make it a little bit better. But the fact that it's literally a mindless, it's got 2 intelligence, a fine steed, horse, has a 6 intelligence. It is smarter than a gargantuan elder elemental. It has legendary actions, which is beak attack, a movement, or a swoop, which is basically a move and fiery talent attack. So beak does 2d6 plus 8. If it's a creature or flammable object, it gets set on fire, and it takes a d10 fire damage a turn, and it makes talent attacks 2d8 plus 8. Then we can scroll down. So let's look at the Leviathan as a comparison. It's stronger, first of all. But it has Tidal Wave. It has a big old water attack ability that does a bunch of cool stuff. And then again, it has generic attacks. It's also dumb. Okay. Let's go down to the Tempest, right? The Tempest is this badass looking Rayquaza lightning bird serpent thing. Awesome. What does it get? Okay, pretty much the same stuff, but it can generate a lightning storm. It can also do a lightning strike, which it can shoot out, and it can do a screaming gale. It has a ranged attacks, it has these cool abilities, and it is basically, it causes a storm around it. Very cool. Also dumb. We have the Zartan, this giant-ass earth turtle thing that I also super love. It makes me think of Torterra from Pokemon. It even has trees growing off of it, so even more like Torterra. Again, also stupid. But we've got earth-shaking movement, a cool ability here where it basically makes earthquakes as it moves. And then look, spew debris. It has a breath weapon where it spews chunks of rocks. There's a whole bunch of cool things it can do. It can heal itself. It can do all this stuff. And then everybody else has cool abilities that let them tap into their primal nature of creating storms or tidal waves or earthquakes. And I can make a beak and a claw attack, and if I die, well, then I turn into an egg that's immune to damage. And if you touch me, you take 66 damage. And you take a d10 if you're close to me, and you hit me. Meh. Not a huge fan. Again, that's one particular thing to nitpick, I know. But it bothers me. And, the fact that there was a lot of chapters in this book... you know what? The fact that there was a lot of chapters in this book that I don't personally think were super necessary, and a lot of the lore I would have loved to just get... In place of the lore for a lot of this, I'd love more character options, and I'd love more monster options. Again, this is my opinion, and my opinion alone. So you guys are obviously more than willing and free to argue with my opinion, and let me know how you feel in the comments below. I'm actually genuinely curious to know. What did you think of Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes? First of all, it was also plagued with a ton of printing errors, too. So there was, like, scuffed spines and busted up stuff. So that's part of the reason why my friendly local game store got, like, one copy that they put aside for me, rather than, like, a whole slew of copies. Because they had to return them all because there was printing issues. So there's printing issues with the books, which isn't really Wizards of the Coast fault, but, you know, that's something. And then we also have the fact that I'm not, like, super impressed with this book. Yes, I am going to go out, I'm going to buy it. Yes, I am going to do a giveaway of this book for you guys to get your copies for free, or potential, anyway. But, I don't know, I'm just sort of underwhelmed by the whole thing. Am I going to use these monsters in my campaign? Absolutely. No question about it. I will 100% be using these monsters. I'm going to play any of these new races. I'm playing one of the new Tieflings in our Evil campaign already, so yes. But am I going to throw stuff about the Blood War in one of my campaigns? Maybe. I'm going to read that whole chapter front to back again because it's really cool stuff. But overall, I feel like I'm pretty underwhelmed with Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. I sort of felt this way, again, about the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, where most of it was like, this is lore about the Sword Coast. If you're not playing in the Sword Coast, or you're playing in a system, you know, a different area of Dungeons and Dragons or a homebrew world, the lore about the Sword Coast does shit for you. So, I don't know. And maybe in your world, the demons and the devils are all on the same team and they're not fighting, so the Blood War is pointless, but I don't know. Like I said, if I had to give this a rating, I'd probably give this like a 6 out of 10. Not that I normally do that, but I give it a 6 out of 10 mostly because of the cool monsters in the back and the lore on the Blood War and the Gith. But the fact that there's chapters on things I don't think are really necessary. The fact that they reprinted most of, like, they added a chapter about dwarves and a chapter about gnomes, and they reprinted stuff from the Sword Coast Adventures Guide and then didn't reprint the thing for halflings from the Sword Coast Adventures Guide. I don't know. And then again, I know it's such a nitpicky thing, but the Phoenix just really just hits me where it hurts. And if you're curious, guys, I will do this. I will absolutely grab my 3rd edition, I think it's Monster Manual 3, and I will show you the Phoenix from the Monster Manual 3 and compare it to the Elder Elemental Phoenix contained within this book, just to show you why I'm so pissed. Anyway, guys, sorry to end this on a downer. But anyway, I'd love to know what you guys think about Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. Do you like it? Did you pick it up? Did you regret picking it up because you did? Did my video change your opinion on whether you should pick it up or not? Or did it make you go out and want to pick it up yourself just to see what's up? Or did you absolutely hate everything I had to say and think that I should keep my opinions to myself? Let me know in the comments below. Alright, guys, I will see you for the next Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes video, where we will dive deeper into the Tiefling Sub-Races, comparing those Tiefling Sub-Races to the ones we got in Unearthed Arcana. So, I'll see you next time.